Then they headed over to Chief Justice John Roberts' residence with a similar message.
You don't get to take away my bodily autonomy and enjoy your Saturday night at home. You can do one or the other.
Wooten Hallway, who has had an abortion and is a sexual assault survivor, has been holding candlelight vigils in front of Justice Kavanaugh's home.
Such a high-stakes situation that if, it's a little bit noisy in the neighborhood, in comparison to what women in this country are facing, it's really not a big deal.
Here we go. And we are back at you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in today to Put 'em on the Couch. I'm your host, Jason McCoy, flanked by my good man, colleague, cohort,
Nelson Boyer.
And we are the cast of
Put 'em on the Couch.
We are back today with a firecracker, man. Well,
Protest, buddy. Protest.
Not literally a firecracker. We don't want any police sort of interrogation.
Presence.
I don't need the National Guard out in front of my house aiming lasers.
Wait till January 20th, 2025. You never know.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what the Constitution says about protests?
It says you cannot do it unless you do it the exact way that makes everybody
close.
The majority
It also says the right time. Not just the right way. You have to have the right time.
Yeah, no, what really? Seriously,
Right.
what does it say for real?
Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the people to peacefully assemble.
There you go.
I love that, man. Look, that is really important concept.
And if you don't honor that, does it say the consequences will be those fake grenades, those smoke bombs, those rubber bullets?
Well, that would be, abridging the right of the people to peacefully assemble.
Okay.
So there's very few limits on when and where a protest can take place. Now, there is the question, which we'll get into, of the law of the moment versus natural law, right? If you think about something like the civil rights movement,
got a moral imperative behind
when people are walking across Edmund Pettus Bridge, the police had the law of the moment on their side,
sure,
but they did not have natural law.
No. I guess when you're
sort of
cutting a padlock, right? When you're cutting a padlock, like those 2 or 3 people did out a couple of years ago when they stopped the flow of oil for a couple hours.
Oh yeah.
Interrupted about 3 million barrels of oil. That's like what 2-3 minutes for Exxon or whatever. Anyway, they cut the padlocks. Were arrested, of course, and they were arrested for sabotage. And I understand that sabotage is a type of protest.
Could be.
And under the right kind of circumstances, you might even argue that you have not only the moral right, but you're obliged morally to sabotage something, right? I think that's what you mean by natural law versus law of the moment, right?
Yeah, sure.
If you got the moral high ground to stand on, if you feel like the powers that be are threatening you or society, I mean, I think about climate change. Is there a bigger moral imperative, a bigger moral threat?
Perhaps not.
Arguably. And the people who cut those locks on the pipeline, I guess they really believe that. They felt like, you left me no other choice.
Right. And, that's sort of why our founders were so big on including something like that in our Constitution. The American Revolution didn't really start as a revolution or a war. It started as a protest. It started as the people going up to the parliament or going up to the custom houses, going up to the tax collectors and saying, look, you guys are ignoring our rights. You guys are ignoring what you have granted us, and you're violating our rights as natural-born Englishmen. During the founding period, they actually had liberty funerals where they would they'd go get drunk in a tavern, and they'd take a guy and put him in a box, and they would cry and mourn. They'd crepe everything out. They had black on. They'd be like, liberty is past. And then
is that similar to burning in effigy?
They would burn an effigy too, but it's similar, but the guy would actually just jump out of the coffin. They would say some prayers and they would resurrect. Yeah, they'd resurrect liberty.
That's kind of the opposite of burning an effigy.
Then they would go drink more.
That's a rebirth.
Yeah, reborn. Yep. So I mean, this concept was really, really important, and it's remained important, I think, throughout our history. I mean, and there are plenty of examples where you could say, well, did it go too far, right? What about the Boston Tea Party? Did that go too far?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you tell me.
I would say no. I would say it didn't go too far. It went up to the line and then no further. Nobody got hurt, right? Just some
No.
tea.
But a little bit of destruction of property that's not yours,
Yeah.
right? So I
yeah,
guess it is one of those sort of three categories that some political psychologists and philosophers talk about when they're trying to separate peaceful protests from otherwise unpeaceful protests.
Well, and then there again, you have the law of the moment, right? Because the powers that be in Parliament passed the Intolerables Act, right? They said, well, this was absolutely unacceptable. You can't destroy property. So, do you think the Boston Tea Party went too far?
I mean, I could say no, but I'm not a historian, so I don't feel like I even have the right to weigh in. What do you think, Mr. Historian?
I would say that it went just far enough. It went right up to the line because there was that element of destruction of property.
Sure.
And there is that, again, we have that natural law versus law of the moment. Parliament passed the Intolerables Act right after that. So you can't destroy all of our property. But, I think natural law is at the heart of any good protest, right? I think it's about pointing out something that is fundamental, that might go against the grain, that might go against, any law at any time. I think of child protests, for instance, or child labor protests, or union
Climate protests.
You don't, and that's the point of a protest, right? You're not going to have the law on your side if you're protesting
You're not going to have the
something.
majority. You're not going to have the government. You're not going to have all the other people who support it on your side. I think several sort of history buffs and people who are into sort of studying protest, D. Ray McKesson comes to mind. He has a lot of cool, flowery language for some of the stuff, but he says, when you are protesting, you are obviously protesting in the face of people who are angry. And of course, when you do that, the protesters themselves oftentimes can't help but to be angry as well. So it's not like you're ever going to be completely peaceful. Nobody's ever going to sing Kumbaya when they have diametrically opposed beliefs. What do you think about that?
I think that's true, but I think it's important to channel that. You think of somebody like Gandhi, you think of somebody obviously like Dr. King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the nonviolent movement.
Sure.
I think it's really important to channel that. I was just watching my class because we're talking about the power of media, citizen participation in government. So Selma is a really good movie for that. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have.
But there's a scene there where they're talking about what nonviolence is, and they said, "Look, nonviolence is not passive; it's really, really powerful." And in terms of protest, in terms of shaping public opinion, changing law, it really is. That is a really powerful movement. This idea of do whatever you want to me. I'm right, you are wrong. So what is a broken bone? What is a fire hose?
Well, I have no problem with how anyone chooses to sort of express themselves through protest, provided that they're not hurting anyone. But again, sometimes hurting someone is required if you are trying to stop something that is even larger than that. For instance, if I know that there is a truck barreling down the street towards a crowd of children at a Boy Scout parade, and I pull a couple of adults into the road with me to sort of stop it or slow it down before it hits all these kids. I mean, yes, it's violent. Yes, it's outrageous what I did. I murdered a couple of people. But, ethically, I could argue that I've got natural law on my side. I'm protecting a large number of children. I would do the same for my own children. But I know that's an extreme example, but nevertheless, I do want to. So, I don't feel comfortable telling people how to express their protest. I think on the whole, we got to make sure that we don't allow the cause to eclipse the tactic or to be eclipsed, by the tactic. So is violence ever justified? I would imagine so.
I would agree that violence can be justified in the face of extreme injustice. However, what I will say, and I'm going to qualify that, I don't think that once violence enters the picture, I don't think you have a protest anymore.
Yeah, you have something else.
You have something very different. Mm-hmm. And, violence is in the eye of the beholder, right? Or justification, rather, is in the eye of the beholder. Right. I think if you went to something like January 6th, they would say they were 100% justified.
Yeah, at least it started out that way. And the ones who were violent, they had no choice.
Or they were provoked, right? So, I think we have to be very, very careful. But I don't think anytime you have violence, I don't think you have a protest. I think you have something else.
I was also interested in what you said earlier about, hey, if possible, you should try to be peaceful. And that does seem to work. I would push back a little bit and say, my concern about, protesting is that peaceful protest mantra and always evoking the name of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. is that seems very convenient, particularly for the powers that be, particularly for the people who are doing the disenfranchising, the people who are doing the thing against the minority group, right? It's easy for me, if I'm in the majority, I've got all the power, and I like the status quo, to say, hey, why don't you just do it like Gandhi did? Why don't you just do it like Martin Luther King Jr.?
I would say that
that's
fundamentally, that represents a fundamental misunderstanding about why those people were effective. I agree with you. I think that's people like to look back at that through rose-colored glasses, and it's important to remember that they polled plenty during those time periods in the 50s, 60s, and Dr. King was never popular. Dr. King was always considered extreme.
Yeah, he certainly wasn't considered a complete pacifist.
I mean, the way they talk about it today, the way a lot of people, everybody has sort of co-opted Dr. King to their vision, really it represents misunderstanding of why he was effective and why Gandhi was effective, because it wasn't as simple as, look, we're nonviolent,
Yeah.
And I feel like that's sort of the we're nonviolent, we're colorblind,
sure, yeah.
And that's sort of become this caricature of what that moment really was. And that's a shame, because we can learn a lot from it if we want to affect change as citizens. And, in a democracy, citizens are sovereign, right? We are the last stop. We might not always feel that way. We might feel like that there's a them or a they. And, I think there's something very attractive about having this other group out there that is coming after us, because it sort of gets rid of our responsibility. It alleviates our responsibility to our own power. And we can say, well, we're not really all that powerful. When the truth is, in a democracy, we are. And that is uncomfortable to have that type of power.
Yeah. I think about us versus them when it comes to protests as being a motivating force, personally. Now, I am familiar with the evidence that suggests that when you have a clear us versus them, it can also lead to things that are more aggressive, even more violent, can lead to even more extreme sort of polarization. But I certainly see motivation as a big force, right? If I were trying to move a group of people against or for a cause, I should say, and I felt like we weren't gaining any headway any other way we approached it, I might actually, as an extreme, I might actually say, look, I might start painting a picture of the group that we are protesting against as the other. I might vilify them. I might do all these kind of rhetorical tricks in order to get my group energized and mobilized. But I am familiar with the research that says, look, that is dangerous, because when the one group starts to see the other group as an extreme other, you might not even see them as human anymore. And so then you're right, it can devolve into something that, doesn't even resemble protest anymore. I want to also
I think we're probably, somewhere we're circling that moment right now.
Yeah, we have been, haven't we?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that there are some studies, one in particular I'm familiar with that I just read a few hours ago, actually, from Stanford. They had people across the political spectrum come into a lab and watch film footage of Donald Trump speaking. And they juxtaposed the film footage with these different types of protesters. Here's what that research scientist from Stanford, Rob Wheeler, told NPR's Shankar Vedantam.
What we found was that the extreme protest tactic led people to report increased support for Trump. So this would be consistent with the idea that exposure to an extreme protest event risks creating a public opinion backlash where people actually turn away from your cause, even if they might have supported it otherwise.
Well, it's funny when I hear this stuff, because all the time the psychological research usually comes back and validates what political science knows to be true.
Yeah.
And that is, Dr. King.
The Great Civil Rights March in Washington, a moving exercise of one of the most cherished rights in a free society, the right of peaceful protest.
People taking to the streets and demanding action from their government. There's no way that can be controversial, right?
Whether or not he was like a really good guy, Gandhi, whether or not they were good people, wonderful, noble human beings who were, peace, that's totally irrelevant to their protests and their movement. They opted for nonviolence because they knew it to be the most effective form of protest.
I see.
when you have violence, when violence enters the equation, it
Changes the
has
dynamics.
a 0% success rate. I mean, look at terrorism, right? Are you telling me a terrorist never murdered for good cause or was never justified, or that is irrelevant to how people perceive
So you would say
violence.
for the long-term effect, violence doesn't really win the day.
Never,
Right.
never.
But in the short term, perhaps it will kind of
It might make
get
a
what you want,
point.
make you
It
feel
could make
better in the
people
point, yeah.
scared. Well, and this brings me to something I've been thinking a lot about the last couple of days, and that is, the lack of protection for protests and for peaceful assembly across the world.
Hey, and let's take a break and put a pin in that. When we come back, we'll pick that up.
All right.
No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! Full street! Full street! Full street!
And we're back. You're listening to Put 'em on the Couch with Jason McCoy and Nelson Beaulieu. We've been talking about protest, political activism. My own definition, Nelson, of a protestor is someone who stands up, stands out, stands for, maybe even stands against political or social injustice, inequity, whether it be specific or systemic. I have seen other definitions that I like even better, if you'd like to hear them. One, I think it's D. Ray McKesson again, saying that protests are an opportunity again to make space for the answer, but they're never the answer themselves.
I like that one.
Another activist says that protest is about telling the truth in public, And obviously, we've got to always consider the ethics of how we're going about protesting, why we're protesting, and probably if we're going to do it right, we got to check in with ourselves routinely to make sure that, on the whole, our cause is not being eclipsed by our protest tactics, right?
Right.
And as you were pointing out earlier, that Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and many others that we don't talk about, they committed to a more nonviolent style, not because it was the right thing to do morally, not because they thought it would make, quote, the man happy, but because they knew it worked.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think that sort of gets us to really the point of protest, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why do it if you don't believe in it and don't believe there is an end in sight? If you don't believe there is something that can change?
Exactly. Right? That's exactly right. And that's why I said that's why it is enshrined in our laws that we have the right to do this. Mm-hmm. And like I was saying, I was thinking often this week about protests in places like Russia, where Alexei Navalny was murdered in a Russian prison. The opposition leader who was outspoken in his criticism of Russian government.
Nonviolent.
Certainly nonviolent. Well, I mean, he experienced violence.
Yeah,
but he was he was nonviolent.
But his words were threatening, weren't they?
Absolutely. And so here you have a guy now, his mother's asking for his body back. Mm-hmm. And as she's doing that, Russian state TV is announcing that, well, yeah, we're not doing that yet, but also your other son is now an enemy of the state, and he is in jeopardy.
Yeah.
So the Navalny
Outrageous.
family is still if you go
under
and lay,
dire threat, yeah.
If you go and lay, there's a memorial to him in his hometown.
Mm-hmm.
If
lay
you
a wreath on there, and you're going to be questioned.
Your face is going to be planted in the snow.
Yeah.
And there's a debate about dictators and whether or not, in America we call this a sign of weakness, the murder of political opposition. Dictators don't see this as a sign of weakness, do they?
No.
What goes through the mind of the empowered when they see large-scale demonstration?
How dare you raise a question? How dare you insult me? How dare you mount any kind of defense? I mean, that's the way alphas think in general.
It makes it difficult, doesn't it, to
argue
achieve
if you're a true
change.
alpha, and you truly are powerful, and you truly are of substance, and you truly have what is right and just on your side, would you have to use those kinds of tactics to silence critics?
Spoken like a true beta.
I mean, I'm just feeling... I'm thinking more like Roosevelt or one of those presidents that we still revere historically who said, protest, criticism, questioning is key, right? It's part of that third rail. It's what the media is supposed to do.
That's right.
And I think one of them, maybe Roosevelt, said, look, especially in sort of times of unrest, especially in times of, say, war, people need to be asking questions.
Absolutely.
The president needs to be standing there
100%,
and taking the answer and giving the answers. Talk about protesters going to the houses of elected officials.
As we get into that, we should talk about effective versus ineffective protests, right?
What separates an effective protest from an ineffective protest?
So I think to have an effective protest, right, you have to have certain elements involved. They have to be political. They have to have favorable public opinion on their side. It's best to have an effective protest coupled with other movements and organizations. They should be using mainstream tactics, so nonviolence, public demonstrations, rallies, media attention. They usually couple these efforts with traditional lobbying, traditional mobilization events, mobilization of voters. And again, the civil rights movement is a classic example of that. They were using the media to garner favorable public opinion. It's one thing to hear, hey man, Alabama's crazy. This guy was bitten by a dog just for sitting.
Another thing to show it on film.
And then when you see it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can.
I think that helped the Vietnam sort of anti-war
exactly. That's another very effective protest. I think of things like child labor laws, as I said earlier, LGBTQ protests in the 1980s. These things were very, very effective because they used those traditional
But wouldn't you also
things.
say it's really difficult to be effective when you're just one person? I mean, it's easy to say, let's be sort of the status quo. Let's be very careful and cautious about the techniques we use, right? Let's use these normal avenues like the media. Let's use picket signs. Let's use our voice, maybe a bullhorn. But that's very difficult to do if I'm protesting, for instance, a pipeline by myself. I'm probably not even going to make the news.
Right.
On the other hand, I can possibly make a lot of news and make a lot of change and make a lot of people uncomfortable and really carve out a space for a broader conversation about climate change if I can somehow garner 1 million people support and get them in a street standing there and yelling and picketing.
What I
feel
would
like
say
if you
is
have if you have numbers on your side, you have the privilege of being less outrageous with your protest. Let's say it that way, right? You don't have to use sabotage. You wouldn't have to use sort of setting yourself on fire. You wouldn't have to go into a hunger strike. You wouldn't have to burn a building. But if you've got a few people, maybe that's it. It's just easier to get attention, perhaps.
Okay, but you're acting like it's an either or in that scenario. So what I'm saying is people who self-immolate, Buddhist monks who self-immolate, right? Yeah, they're one person. Okay. But was there a free Tibet movement? I mean, did I miss that?
Oh, yeah. No,
I'm pretty
there was.
sure it was everywhere, right? People who, like, there's
But
groups
what
now,
is that tipping point?
There's groups now who go to the homes of elected officials, obviously Supreme Court justices, but now there was just a story, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has protesters outside of his home, and they protested his 3 and 4-year-olds going to preschool. They threw blood on their car and said, Daddy is a war criminal.
Yeah.
And so, okay, you're saying, well, that's only 1 or 2 people, and how else are you going to garner that attention? I get that. There's not large-scale protests against the war in Gaza? Like, I've seen like 10.
I would say it does seem like that goes too far. But to that, I would say this is an elected official. This is an appointed official at the highest levels of our government, just like the Supreme Court justices, just like congressmen. And so I don't think that they should be given special sort of privilege in the sense that
is being at home and sitting in your house peacefully, is that a special privilege, or is that just a...
Going to a restaurant is the next step, right?
Is
Driving
that a
to the gas
special
station.
privilege?
Maybe. I mean, we treat celebrities the same way. We stand outside their houses, we stalk them, we take photos of them. I mean, no one asked
Taking a photo
no one
and
asked
pouring
me.
blood on somebody or fake blood on somebody are kind of different.
Yeah, I know. I get
a little
it.
bit.
I get it.
I mean,
But
you
I
can
don't
take a picture of that.
But Blinken wasn't. They didn't pour fake blood on him, did they?
On his car.
On his car, yeah. They didn't pour fake blood on him. They didn't pour fake blood on his.
And yeah, I mean, I
kids.
get it. There's always a line, and it always ends
Now,
somewhere.
it's easy for me to say it because I haven't been protested, right? My kids haven't been threatened.
I have.
Yeah, you have.
I
And that's why
have.
probably there's a little bit more oomph in your voice.
But,
you wanna
okay,
share where that comes from?
I mean, so you're saying he's an elected official. I was an elected official.
Yeah, I
Doesn't
know.
it matter the size and scale, or no?
Size and scale maybe does matter.
Does it?
Maybe.
Does it? I mean,
Maybe.
aren't the issues that we decide for the students in New Hanover
How serious
County?
the threat is. I mean, I've been threatened in my personal life. I've been threatened in my professional life, right? Through an email or just some guy yelling at me. I've felt threatened at other times when people weren't yelling at me, just maybe when they gave me a certain look or when they honked the horn at me. again, I don't really know what to say to that except to say, we do live in a democracy. We do live in a world in which we have the right to be a little fearful. We have the right to be a little intimidated. You're never going to be protected so much so that you feel 100% safe. I mean, that's just part of the life we live. We give up a little bit of that safety because we want to be as free as possible, right? Yes, you could pass laws to make it so that nobody could come within 1,000 feet of your place of work or 1,000 feet of your house. You could pass a law that makes it battery to pour fake blood on somebody's car. You could. I personally think it's just vandalism. I don't think you could charge the person with more than just vandalism. But we do treat people in public office way more special than we treat average people. And those same average people, I think, are trying to call attention to that. They're saying, look, you don't give a crap that my kids aren't getting a good education. You don't give a crap that my kids are drinking lead in the water in Detroit. You don't give a crap that, I'm not saying that about the protesters outside Blinken's house, but, people are, I think, doing what they can to affect change.
I believe that is a travesty and a disrespect to actual protests. Protests have to have some measure, some chance of success. What is the point of tormenting Anthony Blinken's 3 and 4-year-old child and letting them know, hey, you are not safe. You are not immune from this. This is your father. Yeah. These are 3 and 4-year-old kids. What is the point?
Well, I'll admit I can't say a whole lot about it because I haven't seen those specific allegations or the evidence of what those protesters were saying about the 3-year-old. That's disgusting.
They weren't saying anything about the 3-year-old. The car opened up, the SUV was taking them to preschool, and they're sitting there shouting at the car saying, Daddy's a war criminal. I mean, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine.
You think that's perfectly fine?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I do.
Do
I think it's perfectly legal? I suppose.
It's legal and it's fine. It's
in the
ugly.
Same way,
it's disgusting.
It's not in the same way. It's fine. It's legal to use racial slurs
No. I would not
show up at a Klan rally.
No, I think it's
the
pouring
same
fake blood on somebody's car is and shouting that your dad is a war criminal is way less threatening and way less insulting than using the N-word, personally.
I think it's in the same vein of
no, because the people you use the N-word against,
it's an abuse of your freedom of speech. It's an abuse of your freedom to protest.
But the people who we level the N-word against have hundreds, thousands of years of disenfranchisement, and to this day, they still are systematically discredited, disqualified, and pushed to the side. Anthony Blinken holds a special place in American politics and American government. He is rich. He is powerful. He can do so many things. He can use the arm of his government to do so many things.
He has an office.
He has to be very careful. He has a power that requires more responsibility than the average citizen who's yelling at him.
He has an office. Go to his office and protest.
I know.
Senator
right way, right time, right?
No, I'm not saying
But they don't
right
let
way.
you. When you go to the office,
Right
sometimes
time.
they don't let you in. I've tried to protest offices before. I've tried to get in and talk to people before. They're like, no, thank you. No,
Let me tell
get
you
out of
something.
here.
I have been accosted, yelled at, screamed at, and protested against. And I have been to Afghanistan, and I was far more afraid for my personal safety when people were showing up outside of our home, when those type of protests were taking place against me and my family. I was far more concerned.
Well, people are also concerned about their own families, and they see government officials as the only thing that stands in the way of them and a better life. I mean,
4-year-olds
across this country, we're still debating whether or not 4-year-olds have the right to medical care. We're still debating whether 4-year-olds have the right to a good education. We're still debating whether 4-year-olds have the right to clean drinking water. We're still debating whether or not, 4-year-olds have the right to have a parent who's poor have an attorney. I mean,
the debate over whether or not they have the right to drive to school without fear is over. We're done with that
personally,
debate.
I would say if I were a Supreme Court justice, or I were someone who was a high-ranking official in the government like a senator, I would never expect to go to a restaurant and to be left completely alone.
I didn't say that.
Ever. In fact, I would expect people to shout at me, curse at me, call me all kinds of names, particularly if I was doing things that would disenfranchise, that I was doing things that would continue to perpetuate racism, inequity across the country. What's right?
Wait, why do you say particularly? What if you were doing stuff
Particularly.
that was equitable? What if you were doing things that said, I think that trans girls should be able to play in girls' sports in middle school, and you were being screamed at a restaurant?
I can only speak for myself. I'm saying that I could understand if people felt strongly about that enough to come to the restaurant I'm in and scream at me and call me transphobic. I could understand it.
But again, we're getting into the question.
I know we're getting.
Are you a protester if you're doing that? Is that a legitimate protest? Do you have any hope of succeeding in your mission of? You're just trying to make people uncomfortable,
No.
and that's harassment.
We can't get in the mind of people who are protesting, though. So I don't know the reason why the person goes into the restaurant or the person goes to Anthony Blinken's car.
But what would a
blood.
reasonable person assume, that you're going to make change by doing this?
But why do we expect reasonable people to respond to unreasonable policies and unreasonable inequities that are continuing to be perpetrated for hundreds, if not thousands of years?
We don't. We use a reasonable person standard to find out whether or not somebody is violating the law. Or at the very least, can't we use the reasonable person standard to find out whether or not something is ethical or unethical?
No, I don't think for ethical, unethical, for breaking the law or not. Look, if you have a law that says you can't pour blood on someone's car, fake blood that will wash off, then that's okay. Now, has that law been broken? If so, then you can prosecute them to the fullest extent of that law. If it's vandalism, then that's what they get. But this idea that, the person needs to be protected, the person needs to, that did that needs to be charged with assault, I think that's a little much. I think you're going too far. Because I think it's easy to put the finger out there and say this person should be treated as a special case, because this is a special crisis that we are looking at here. This person's been threatened. His kid was also in the car. But what if the tables were turned, right? President Trump has said many times, right? He has said very clearly what kind of country he wants us to be. He even thinks that it's silly that Navalny's wife wants to continue to take up the mantle. He thought it was silly that Navalny went back to Russia. Why would you do that?
That's what I'm saying. You're making a mockery of people who don't have this protest. You are abusing this right, and in so doing, you are making a mockery of people
because
who
you
have
don't believe that the protest is as important as what Navalny's protesting for. That's the difference.
No, it's not. It's not
How
a
is it
question.
a mockery?
It's not a question of importance.
Well, you said
these are public officials. You said it yourself. They're public.
Not above the law. They're not above my ire. They're not above my criticism.
Of course not. But that's the point. They're public officials. There are 100 ways to pour fake blood on them.
Yeah.
But going outside of their homes,
ticking. People are dying every day in America.
Going outside of people's
the government
homes,
fails to act.
Going outside of people's homes like this is not acceptable.
That's the least they can do, in my opinion.
It's not acceptable.
Going outside someone's home with a picket line.
And I don't care if it's Ted Cruz or anybody else.
I know, because you have been a politician. I think that's probably what's going on.
I don't think that is. I'm also a human being who thinks that being in your home is your space.
How long should we wait?
If you're a public official, you have no space.
No, how long should we wait?
No right to a personal space.
Yeah, you have right to personal space. And if somebody invades it, then you can prosecute them for trespassing. You can prosecute them for vandalism. But prosecute them for terrorist act?
I didn't say terrorist act. You're creating a straw man. I never said prosecute them for terrorist act. I'm saying I'd have no problem passing a law that says you can't protest outside of the home of a public official. You're a public official. You work for a government.
And people have the right to protest outside my office.
You'd have no problem with people standing outside of your home.
I'd have a problem.
Screaming and protest. But you think it's legal?
Yeah, I do think it's legal.
You think that's legal? And
I know
it should
it's
be
legal.
legal.
I know it's legal.
Well, it is legal.
You're asking
and
me
you
if
think
it should be illegal.
Yes.
No, I don't think it personally should be illegal. But, however, I'm also that person that says, just because I disagree with something doesn't mean I disagree with your right to do it. Just because I wouldn't do it
so you don't
doesn't mean I'm going to judge you for doing it.
I understand. You don't think that type of a protest makes a mockery of protest to join labor unions?
It depends on what they're protesting and how hard they have already protested using the means that you want. For instance, we have people who are dying in this country living on the streets. Talk about Blinken's children. There are plenty of people's children dying on the streets. We have more homeless
Yeah,
children
but they're
in America.
protesting the war in Gaza. Like, do you think Anthony
I'm not talking about that.
Blinken's...
I don't know. He's a big member of our government right now.
Yeah.
He does have sway. If this is the way they want to protest, if this is what gives them the attention they need and makes them feel like they're moving on this, if it's on their heart to do it, they feel like they've got a moral imperative to save kids in Gaza, yeah. Likewise, I think there should be more protests in the streets in America for the homeless kids that are dying in America. I think there should be more protests on the streets in America.
Not at the labor secretary's house.
That's fine. That's going to be the street outside his house too. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I do. I think there should be protests outside the Supreme Court until someone like Clarence Thomas leaves the Supreme Court. I think you should protest outside his house, outside the Supreme Court every day. This guy is taking money hand over fist. We know
when
it.
you were in an executive position.
I haven't been, but okay. If I were.
When you are in those type of positions, there are things that you choose to do and there are things that you have to do, right? And when people protest things that you have to do, in this case, Secretary Blinken is charged with executing the policies that the president puts forward. The president is this nation's chief diplomat.
And what can he do, though, if he doesn't want to do that?
He can resign.
That's right.
He can resign. And then what? And that's going to stop the president. That's going to change the president's policy.
That would stop them protesting outside of his house if that's what you're worried about.
And that's where we're at.
I don't know where we're at.
That's where we're at.
I don't know where we're at. I don't know, but here's the thing. When President Trump wins the election, if he wins the election, I'm pretty confident that he's going to, and he starts installing these lackeys, these sycophants, these very bad people to sort of do what he just dreams up doing, I hope like hell people will stand outside of their houses and protest. When Stephen Miller is, a bigwig in our government this next time around, and he is implementing policies that are draconian, that make the policies that Trump was pushing the first time around look like child's play. I hope there are people that
Go
will
back
stand
again,
up.
and what did you say was a very effective way to protest?
No,
and
I
what
said
was
that's
ineffective?
No, I said what the Stanford researchers found was when you get people on your side. That doesn't mean it's going to work. Just because you got people on your side doesn't mean it's going to work. You can change the narrative.
That's the entire point.
No, to get people on your side.
You can't make change in the minority. You have to have public opinion on your side.
I disagree with that.
You have to have public opinion on your side.
I disagree with that.
How can you make change in the minority without getting the public on your side?
Ask Japan that when we dropped 2 bombs. How
Those aren't protests.
No, I mean,
and by the way, repeated protests, repeated social pressure got an apology out of the mouth of the president of the United States. Yeah, that's a big deal.
That's not an outcome that
an
people are really looking
acknowledgement
for.
of what happened.
That's child's play. Again, I think you can change the narrative all day long with peaceful protests. You can change the narrative all day long without ever changing the outcome. I mean, that's the danger I see. You can always get lip service and acknowledgement, but people are tired of it. I mean, we only live on this earth 80 years. Our kids are going to be on earth for 80 years. We want to have the best life and the most fair life possible. We have disenfranchised whole groups of people for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and our policies continue to allow these kinds of inequities to be perpetrated. We know this. And just because we don't believe it's bad, just because we don't feel it, I mean, we have that privilege, Nelson, but there are people out there that do not have that privilege. I'm actually ashamed that I don't fight harder for people who are disenfranchised.
Okay, but what you're going to do,
and if it's throwing some
hurt,
fake blood on a car, is not hurting anyone.
What you're going to do by doing this, by going to people's houses, by introducing this new element to protest, is you are going to create a backlash because most people don't think that's a good idea. Most people don't want that outside of their home and can understand that even public officials who you vehemently disagree with, who you see as perpetuating systemic inequities.
Since you care about numbers, when the police say do not walk across this bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and one person braved it to walk across by himself and got into an altercation with the police and started fighting and was on camera and got bloodied up, and one of the officers got their arm broken, and it was on camera for everybody to see, what would you have said about that?
Well, they walked across in large numbers.
Oh, so it is indeed about walking across in large numbers. So when you walk across in large numbers, it's different somehow. So to that point,
that is a public space.
yeah. So the
That is a
sidewalk
public
outside
space.
of
Yes,
Lincoln's
it's
house, the
technically a
road is a
public
public space.
yeah.
And if you had more than one person standing outside the car, if you had thousands, hundreds of thousands of people standing in the public space outside of his house, it would be okay.
No, I'm saying you can't see a difference between
because
a public bridge
I'm trying to figure out the
and
difference.
somebody
And
right outside somebody's home.
No.
You can't see a difference.
No.
Okay, well, I see a huge
I know,
difference.
but you weren't saying the public space at first. You were saying the numbers. You said you didn't even care about the public space when it was one person walking across the bridge. You said, but there were a lot of them. I'm asking if there was a lot of people standing outside Lincoln's home, in the street, on the sidewalk, across the street, whatever.
Yeah,
Again, I think we can
that'd be
constantly...
inappropriate.
Inappropriate is... Yeah, it's also inappropriate to dip my cornbread into soda, but it's not illegal.
No, it's total. What I'm saying is a protest like that should be against the law.
And I think we have to be careful about saying things should be against the law just because they don't make us feel comfortable, just because they make us uneasy, just because we think they're inappropriate.
No, I'm not saying that that's why it should be against the law, am I? I'm saying it should be against the law because everybody has a right and expectation to peace and quiet in their home.
Mm-hmm.
In their home.
And I'm saying they don't.
All right, so you're saying it'd be totally fine then to if we were in a state, and we're not, but let's say we were in South Carolina, it would be fine to go to the health secretary in South Carolina in protests of, say, mandated masks in the summer of 2020.
I don't know about mandated masks.
Fireworks above her house day and night because we can do that.
Here's the thing. I get to choose what kind of protest I'm going to be a part of. And I've already told you that I would pick and choose. Of course, I'm going to pick and choose. I'm not going to protest certain things, but I would.
But you would support somebody's right to launch fireworks above the house of the health secretary day and night.
If it is a right, I would support it. If it is not legal, if it is not illegal, I would support it.
It is legal. That is legal.
Then of course I would support it.
You support that?
Yes, I have to.
Okay,
I have to. It's not comfortable. It's not something I would do. You don't have
to. You could admit that, Nelson, you were correct.
Why would I want to admit you're correct when you're not? Like, for me, you're not correct. For you, you are. For you, you want the government to pass a rule or a law about everything to make sure that you feel even more comfortable and privileged than you are.
No, again,
I believe that it's okay for people in privileged positions to be uncomfortable more often than every now and then.
I agree. I totally agree.
And I
with that.
also agree that if you're getting death threats, that rises to a completely different level, and there are already laws on the book about that. So that's different, right? I'm not going to say that Blinken should be receiving death threats, but Blinken being yelled at and called a war criminal, yeah. Again, I'm hoping that when President Trump wins again, and he installs his cronies back in office, and he starts to push this strongman, dictatorial sort of fascism movement, I pray that there are people like me who will do anything and everything to call attention to it, to slow it down, to try to get more people behind me. And I can tell you that I don't believe that we would have time, because many experts are saying we could lose our democracy within 4 years. I don't know that there's time to do it slowly, peacefully, without the fake blood, without the shouting. That's my concern.
And I firmly believe that if you go the let me sit outside their home route, certainly if you go the violent route, time doesn't matter because you will have lost. You will have driven those very people that you were talking about in the Stanford experiment. Mm-hmm. If you really think that they would look at what you were talking about and putting fake blood on a 3-year-old's car when they were driving without their parent, right? When they were just driving their kids to school. If you think that that's going to engender support, the support you need to combat people like Donald Trump, I think you're flat out wrong. Yeah. You would be playing right into their hands.
I know you think that is wrong. I know you think that's wrong, but I will hearken back to January 6th. How many Americans do you think, when they look at that film footage, when they are asked survey questions about January 6th, say that was absolutely too much, that was violent, that was horrible? No, you have plenty of people, large numbers of people, millions of Americans who say that was justified. In fact, there needs to be more of that. I personally don't believe there needs to be more of that in order to keep Trump in office. I think there need to be more of that possibly in order to keep Trump from turning our country over to authoritarianism.
Well, what do you know about cults?
Not a lot.
cults of personality. Right. I mean, just because large numbers of supporters have come to believe this lie about what January 6th was, what happened on January 6th, who was responsible, it doesn't mean that that form of protest is in vogue or effective or going to lead the change.
No, I know it not. It doesn't necessarily. It's not going to necessarily do that. But if and when we as a country are pushed to the point where we are going to lose the remaining rights we have, we are going to disenfranchise the rest of the people of every background. If we get to a point where we quite literally take away all the rights and all the abilities for poor people to grieve or to have representation, then I think spilling some fake blood on a Trump official's car will be the least we can do. Because at that point, we will be getting into a situation where we have a dictator like we have in Russia. Navalny, I mean, if he had poured blood on Putin's car and yelled, "Putin, you're a war criminal," you wouldn't be sitting here going, "I can't believe he did that. Don't they have the right?" Because you would say Putin's a terrible person.
I would have no problem with them pouring fake blood on anybody's car if it wasn't right outside of their home when their 3- and 4-year-old were going to school.
So it's right outside the Kremlin. Putin's
Without
got
Putin in the car?
Putin's got grandkids.
Yeah, I'd have a problem with that.
That's crazy.
Because what did his grandkids do?
That sounds like...
What did his grandkids do?
Nothing.
Okay,
But
so why should they feel threatened?
You don't know if they're threatened. You don't
Why
know.
should they feel
you don't
threatened?
Know if they're
Why
threatened.
should they be
because
made
they
to feel
live,
threatened?
They live in Russia, and their granddad is a horrible human being, and he is at fault more than the media. Likewise, if Trump is trying to disenfranchise millions of people and their children and trying to take away what little rights people still have, and he's not acknowledging the plight, especially of people of color, the disenfranchised, and I say something that makes some privileged member of his family who may be underage feel nervous, I'm sorry. I mean, I am. I'm sorry. I want to make sure we understand the sort of the levels of reasoning here. I think there is a such thing as moral reasoning. I think there's certain things that you can do. I think there's certain things that are acceptable under, in other words, certain circumstances, certain things you should never do. And I think there's certain things that are obligatory. And I think the psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg sort of raised this issue 40 years ago or so when he asked kids into the laboratory and gave them this dilemma called the Heinz dilemma. He asked these kids of different ages and ostensibly different levels of moral reasoning, what would you do if your mommy was dying of a disease and you went to the pharmacy to get the medicine that could cure this disease, and the pharmacist says, yeah, we've got some, but it's going to cost $6,000. Well, I don't have that money, and mommy's going to die pretty soon. Well, I guess too bad. So the kid goes out, and what is the kid to do? Now, depending on your level of reasoning, your level of maturity, you might say, for instance, if you're a 3-year-old, well, I guess I'll just have to, I don't know, I guess mommy will have to die. Why does she have to die? Couldn't you ask people for help? Okay, well, yeah, I'll ask for help, but if they don't have the money, mom's going to have to die. Well, couldn't you just go and ask the pharmacist? Yeah, but I don't know him. He's not family. He's probably not going to give it to me. Yeah, but couldn't you just break into the pharmacy and take the medicine? Well, no, that's against the law, and I'd go to jail. Now, ask yourself, what would happen if you asked a 13-year-old that same question? The 13-year-old would say, I'll try some other approaches, but the clock is ticking. And at that point, all bets are off. I will break into that pharmacy at night. I'll make sure nobody's there. I'll break into it. I'll take the medicine. I'll go give it to my mom. A 33-year-old might say, I'll try every method possible. And as a last resort, I'll go in there with a gun. I'll rob that pharmacist of the drug, and I'll take it and give it to my mom.
I'm sorry, but that's just not the same thing. First of all, you are so far removed from the inevitable death when you're talking about protesting outside of an elected official's home that you can't even ethically consider.
How many people have died since the Supreme Court ruled that Roe v. Wade is not the law of the land?
You are far removed from those deaths. Would I understand an individual whose wife or whose mother died because of the Supreme Court Roe versus Wade decision. Yeah, I can understand that. That would make sense to me. Fine.
Pouring blood on the Supreme Court's RV.
But the other, and I can understand that rage.
And yelling you killed.
The other thing that you have to remember is what you are offering in your analogy here is an actual remediation. It's an actual remedy to a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Pouring blood on somebody's car outside of their home, throwing paint at their home, being right outside of their home and being obnoxious, even though I could understand it, that's not a remedy.
I know, but
that's not a remedy.
But people like you, if they did something even more brazen, would say, now that's just outrageous. So maybe their remedy is killing Blinken.
Okay,
right?
but that's,
you would say that's outrageous. Maybe their remedy is
that
laying down in front of his car.
Does that fix the mom?
I don't know what their motivation is. I don't know what their justification is. I don't know what they're trying to get to. If they're just trying to get Blinken to...
But in your analogy, you do know they're trying to get medicine to save their mother.
I was just
they're
telling
not.
you what Kohlberg was doing in terms of trying to demonstrate that there's a type of reasoning that happens as we mature. And mature people, older people, can reason beyond what is legal, what is appropriate, what is disgusting, what makes them feel comfortable or uncomfortable is all I'm saying, right? You were already using some of those words to imply that it should be illegal because it's disgusting. It should be illegal because somebody feels threatened. It should be illegal because I don't like the way it looks.
That's not why I'm saying it should be illegal.
We can go back on the film. You did say that.
It should be illegal because I think people have an expectation, regardless of their profession,
and how horrible they are at their profession,
and how horrible they are at their profession.
That's where I disagree.
In a free society, you should have
the right to be a dictator.
No, you should have the right to be in your home peacefully with your kids,
even if you're a dictator.
Sure.
And see, I disagree with that.
But if you were a dictator, we wouldn't live in a free society.
No, but we don't have to live in a free society. There's nothing that says we have to. In fact, some argue that we already don't. And if we let people like you continue to add
the
more
only
and
way
more
to
legislation.
safeguard freedom is to be allowed to protest outside of Anthony Blinken's home.
No, but one way to
disagree.
kill freedom is to pass a law every time you feel like something is done against you or makes you uncomfortable. And that is exactly what authoritarians do, is they make every protest, everything illegal. You know that.
Yes. So I'm an authoritarian sympathizer because I think some protests go too far and violate people's own freedoms.
No, I don't think you are an authoritarian. And I don't think that you are necessarily wanting that, but I think that is the kind of thinking that can get you there.
I think that is a...
And we'll find out. We'll find out, hopefully, from people who listen to this, what they think.
Well,
do they think we should pass more laws so that public officials, no matter how horrible their decision-making process, no matter how little they give to the public in terms of answering questions, no matter how little time they give to the news, do you believe that they have a right to feel completely safe and completely comfortable anywhere and everywhere they go?
That's not what I said. I said in their own homes. Only in their own homes.
Not outside the restaurant.
No.
Not outside their church.
No, not outside the restaurant. Not outside their church.
Home is the respite.
That's
okay.
it.
Well, then I might be able to get somewhere like that with home, but still across the street in the road, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I still think that's okay. But again, if it's not, yes, pass a law and make it illegal. But be careful with that slippery slope, because again,
I don't think that's a slippery slope.
I know you don't. But then people are protesting
church.
outside your place of work.
You should be outside their place of work. That's where you should go. Mm-hmm. That's where you should go.
But not outside their home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now for local offices, again, I think there is a difference. We had people saying that they were going to go to our offices and protest this. We had people writing, my boss at work saying that I was mentally unstable, that I was...
And people have the right to do that.
I don't think they... Yeah, I guess they have the right.
Have the right to do it,
I guess they have the right.
Like we have the right to sue anybody, say anything we want. That's the beauty of this country.
I do think there should be...
Limitations.
Especially for local officials who have other jobs. Like, one job has nothing to do with the other.
Let me ask you this. If you go on Facebook today and say something that someone doesn't like, do you think your employer should have the right to fire you because they don't agree with what you said?
They do have the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's okay?
Well, no. Sure. I don't know if it's okay or not, but it's... Like, the government can't make laws saying that private companies can't fire people for what they think.
No. I'm saying you don't work for a private company. You work for the state of North Carolina.
Oh, well.
If you went on there right now and said the Patriots are fucking the best football team on the earth and Bill Belichick is the greatest coach, and your boss at your work says you couldn't.
No, I work for the state, so no.
Okay.
I get some extra protections. If I worked for Harris Teeter, I can get fired.
Yeah.
If I worked for, whatever. If I worked for any private company, if I worked for the NFL, I could get fired for taking a knee. 100%. You can get fired. You have no protection there. But, the state would
So
actually
you just think
protect
we
me.
should have special protections for public officials, less for private citizens?
We do have special protections if we work for the state, because the government
And
can't.
Blinken and the Supreme Court justices should be extended even more of those personal privileges of protection.
No.
That's what I mean. I think
No. Nobody should be extended more. I don't think.
because it is more if you want it to be illegal to protest outside of someone's house. There is more. That's more. That's adding.
I think it should be illegal to protest outside anybody's house, public or private, individual.
No matter who the individual is,
No matter
you're
who the
protesting,
individual
and no
is.
matter the relationship between that individual and the protester.
Yes.
Okay.
Outside of somebody's home, yes. I think that is the one line that
So
people.
I'll ask you one more thing.
All right.
Someone comes into your house, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kills a family member.
Mm-hmm.
They're on the run.
Mm-hmm.
You go to their house with your friends, and you guys start protesting the home of this person.
Why would I protest after my family's been murdered?
I don't know. I'm asking. The cops haven't done anything.
I don't even
cops
know.
haven't done anything. But you believe that you know who it is.
Well, I would kill that person.
Well,
There would never be a protest for a murder.
No.
No.
There's protests for death penalty all the time. There's protests for murders all the time. George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight, and it was a huge protest.
Yeah, he was murdered by the
police.
government.
Okay.
If a private citizen came to my house and murdered my family, that's not going to engender some large protest.
No, I'm not saying large. I'm just saying
Or
you.
any No, I'm not going to protest. I'm going to call the police. If I know where the guy is, I'm going to call the police.
I think you need to rewind this tape. I asked you if it was okay to protest outside anyone's house.
And I said no.
And you said no. And then I said, can you protest outside of a suspected killer's house who killed your own family or friend? And you said, why would I protest? I'd kill them.
Yeah, no, I would call the police. No, I would not go protest.
Mm-hmm. But would you have the right to protest?
No.
You should be put in jail.
No, you should go and tell the police.
No.
Hey, I know where this person is.
But we don't get to pick and choose how or when or why people protest, right? We don't get to pick and choose how or when or why people go to the police.
Protests are not personal; they're political. The murder of my family is personal. Your analogy doesn't work because protests have to be political. We said that at the start of the show.
But you were a government official.
Protests
now, if you're a government
have to be-
official,
if I'm a government official and somebody murders assassinates me or assassinates my family, that's still personal. That person acted political, but my reaction would be personal. It wouldn't be political. I couldn't have a political reaction to private behavior.
I think we have enough rules about one group of people versus the other, right, already. I think there's already enough rules, enough privileges for some and not others to go around, right, to last me my lifetime.
I got
And the
you.
idea of giving anyone, especially people in power, more rights to feel more comfortable day to day just because they have a special job that they're doing that we don't want them to ever feel like they're not responsible for the outcome of is ludicrous. Again, if Donald Trump or anyone else in our government who has the capability of making our life better or worse purposely makes our lives worse, and someone is kind enough to go to the restaurant or the house of that person and pour blood on the car and yell, "You are a horrible fascist, you're a baby murderer, you're a whatever," I don't think it should be illegal. But if it is going to be illegal, I think that we should, hold them to the fullest extent of the law. My guess is that that's probably vandalism or trespassing.
Okay.
That's it.
I have no problem with, and look, I've supported freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble and to protest in extreme circumstances with the Westboro Baptist ministers when they were protesting at the funerals of soldiers and
ugly.
saying
It's
God
ugly.
hates fags and doing all.
I don't like it. It's ugly.
That's gross. That's highly inappropriate. I believe that every single person within the confines of their own home has a basic expectation of privacy and of peace. And standing just outside of their property line and saying whatever you want to say or shooting off fireworks is a violation. I don't care where their property line is.
Okay.
To me, that is a violation.
It may be a violation.
To
It may
me,
be a
that
disorderly
is-
conduct. It may be disturbing the peace. It may be vandalism. It may be trespassing. There are already rules or laws on the book for that. But you're basically saying you wish it would be stronger. The laws should have more teeth.
Well, I wish we'd start charging people with disturbing the peace or disorderly conduct.
Okay, there we go. We can do that.
So,
But not battery or assault or terrorism.
no.
Okay.
I don't understand how that would be battery, assault, or terrorism.
I don't understand.
Just have people disperse, and if they don't disperse, arrest them for disturbing the peace. Just the way it's been done in this country since time immemorial. I'm not talking about like an extra special law that says X, Y, or Z. I'm saying if that is not a law, if that is not considered disturbing the peace, then expand the law to cover those type of protests and put people in jail for 24 hours and make them go home.
Okay. Well, you heard it here. Some protesters are peaceful. Some protesters are a little less than peaceful. Some protesters are violent. Some protesters feel as if they have the moral right, I dare say the obligation to protest, not just peacefully, but in any way they feel that they have to. But there are indeed ramifications for protest. As we've already heard here today on Put 'em on the Couch, some protesters risk their lives, their reputations. They risk their livelihoods. But we've been going about an hour, and I think we are unfortunately out of time, ladies and gentlemen. I do thank Nelson for this very heavy, heated, and fun conversation. I hope you guys enjoy it as well.
We do, fun.
As always, look forward to hearing your comments. We look forward to seeing your reviews of the show. And more than anything, we appreciate your shares and your downloads. But listen, if you would, if you're so inclined, shoot us an email at putemonthecouch@gmail.com. Put, P-U-T-E-M, on the couch @gmail.com. Tell us what you think about this show or any others. Tell us your ideas about upcoming shows. Who knows? We might use your idea, or we might even solicit you to be a guest. Again, hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Later.